Hey, it's Maximo and welcome to Maximo's Travels. This is the first of a couple of videos of my 3-day long weekend that I spent in Sydney. I got to ride in one of Sydney's double-decker trains. I went to the Queen Victoria building. I saw two of the most iconic sites in Sydney, the Sydney Opera House as well as the Sydney Harbour Bridge. I checked out the magnificent views from the Sydney Observatory Park. I take a long walk around Darling Harbour and its surrounds. I discover a couple of abandoned monorail stations. I explore the serenity of the Chinese Friendship Garden, and I'm surprised to find wildlife. I have a well-earned beer and a rest after all that walking at the hotel. After dinner, I'll go for a walk around the nearby Chinatown. So join me for my first Sydney adventure. We took a late afternoon flight on a Friday night to Sydney. We flew Qantas, economy class, or cattle class as some may call it. The plane was utterly packed. The economy seats are reasonably comfortable, but there's not much legroom. Not helped by the teenager in front insisting to recline the seat. Very annoying. I think she was the only passenger to do this on the 1 hour and 15-minute flight from Melbourne. The flight was catered. I got a beer and Joe got a drink as well as a vegetarian toasted sandwich, which was quite good. Gluten-free food included soy crackers and more soy crackers. Marvellous selection, isn't it? Anyway, I had a couple of these. At least the sights landing into Sydney was spectacular. Sydney Harbour is always a joy to fly into. We soon landed and found our way to the train station. The train from the airport to the centre of Sydney runs every 5 minutes and costs between $18 and $21. Quite expensive considering how cheap it was to ride the subway stations and trains. It's very efficient, super convenient, fairly fast, if slightly pricey compared to some of the train journeys that we took in Japan. You can get a local Sydney Opal card or transport card, but any Visa or MasterCard, debit card or credit card will also work on these trains. Very convenient.
The train on platform 1 goes to City Circle via Museum. First stop Mascot, then Green Square, Central, New Zealand, St James.
We were staying on the outskirts of Chinatown in the centre of the city. We got off at Museum Station and proceeded to walk to our hotel. We were staying at the Morris Hotel. I will do a separate review of this hotel in a later video. By this stage it was after 9 o'clock. We decided to have an early night in preparation for a big day's touring the next day. We woke up reasonably early the next day after a good night's sleep, had some breakfast and began our tour. This was going to be a long day walking. We started off walking to Town Hall. We didn't go in because there's quite a large line of people waiting to get into some sort of attraction, and we made our way to the Queen Victoria building. It was about a 15-minute walk and 850 metres away from our hotel. The Queen Victoria building was opened in 1898. It covers an entire city block. It's 5 stories and it's home to many international renowned designers and shops. This attracts millions of visitors each year, mainly for its elaborate Romanesque architectural features, stained glass windows, magnificent light-filled atriums, and the mighty dome in its centre. It truly is a spectacular piece of architecture. Our second stop was the iconic and world-famous Circular Quay, and more specifically, the Museum of Contemporary Art. This is around 1.4 kilometres and a 20-minute walk away from the Queen Victoria building. The museum is housed in the old Maritime Services Board building. Construction started in 1937 and only finished in the early 1950s. Sadly, we didn't have time to go in. We spent some time in the waterfront from Circular Quay, looking at all the different Sydney Harbour ferries, checking out the views of Sydney Harbour Bridge, as well as the Sydney Opera House. Took a few videos, photos, and some selfies. We stopped to have lunch and a coffee at one of the piers the other side of the Sydney Harbour Bridge at the Sydney Theatre Company. We continued walking, but shortly after lunch, Jo suddenly felt unwell and decided that it'd be best that she return back to the hotel. I walked up these massive stairs and walked the 1 kilometre to Observation Hill. It was a long, hot uphill and tiring walk. I reached Observatory Park, the highest point in the CBD of Sydney. This park dates back to 1796, where an original windmill was built, and later in 1858, the Sydney Observatory was built. This site and park commands outstanding views of Sydney Harbour, the Sydney Opera House, as well as the Sydney Harbour Bridge. Spectacular views. And at this point, my external microphone on the GoPro failed, leading to a warranty replacement of the GoPro, as well as replacing other bits and pieces. I didn't have much usable audio from Sydney. Hey, it's Maximo. I'm standing on Observatory Hill Park, overlooking Sydney Harbour and Sydney Harbour Bridge. It's a magnificent day, blue skies. What a perfect day for touring around Sydney. I took a lot of photos and videos and then headed towards the Sydney Observatory. Unfortunately, it was closed. You can book online and bookings are recommended. I left the park, walked down the hill and made my way to Darling Harbour, a journey of around 2 kilometres that was going to take around about half an hour. There'd been a hell of a lot of development in the Banger Point side of Darling Harbour, that's the eastern side, with many new high-rise buildings, hotels, cafes, and a very lively scene. It was actually good to see so many people out on such a spectacularly nice day. In my walking, I passed the entrance of both Sea Life, the Sydney Aquarium, as well as Madame Tussauds. Both are world-class attractions. I've visited both many years ago, but didn't stop in this time. I continued walking to the bridge. You get great views of Cockle Bay and Sydney Harbour from the bridge. Up until 2013, Sydney had a monorail. It was closed and they dismantled most of the track, but somehow left this monorail station behind, maybe as a legacy or a memento. I do remember riding the monorail all those years ago. I found a second intact monorail station in a nearby street. I started walking to my next and final destination, the Chinese Garden of Friendship. The garden was a 1 kilometre and 20-minute walk away. And incidentally, if you're in the area, it's also worthwhile seeing the Australian National Maritime Museum. The museum's full of Australia's naval and maritime history, and you can jump on board a submarine and a naval ship. Nearly had a heart attack. I thought these gardens were closed, but this is just a restaurant. I see the entrance over there. So that's where I'll go. These gardens are located opposite the IMAX Theatre. It's open daily from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. and admission is $12. I was quite surprised at how tranquil and peaceful the gardens were, considering it was in the middle of Sydney's CBD. The gardens were a tranquil oasis with the added bonus of seeing wildlife. I made the 1.4 kilometre trek back to the hotel and got myself a well-earned beer. I'll be doing a separate review of the Hotel Morris and the meal that we ate in a separate video. After dinner at the hotel, Joe was feeling much better, so we decided to have a quick walk around Chinatown, which is right adjacent to where we were staying. This Chinatown doesn't quite compare with Hong Kong or Japan or Singapore for that matter, but there were quite a few restaurants and plenty of people around. It was a long and tiring day and we sure slept well that night. I do hope you've liked this video. If so, please consider hitting that like and subscribe button and hit that notify bell to be notified of all my future videos. If you'd like to support this channel, please consider buying me a coffee. Until our next adventure from Sydney, take care and bye now.